To know where we're going, we have to know where things began. Did you know that the forerunner to today's global World Wide Web, the Internet, was developed by the U.S. Defense Development Agency, DARPA, during the Cold War, and was ready at the end of 1969? It was called Arpanet, which stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. It was the world's first functioning packet switching network. In 1971, the first email message was sent via Arpanet, between two computers standing side by side. Just 2 years later, 75% of Arpanet traffic consisted of emails. Planning for the Arpanet began in the 1960s, at the initiative of the U.S. Department of Defense Development Agency, who wanted a secure decentralized technical solution. The name Arpanet was coined by the financiers at the agency. In September 1969, the first two computers were connected to Arpanet system, and by the end of that same year, they had a total of 4 different computers, with different operating systems, connected to the network, which were able to communicate with each other. The network grew, and in 1973, there were a total of 40 computers connected to each other. The first computer outside the U.S. borders was connected on June 15, 1973, in Norser in Norway, via Tanum Teleport in Sweden, with help from a satellite link. Sweden, which has been called Europe's answer to Silicon Valley, has long been involved with the digital development taking place on a global basis. In the 1960s, in order to reduce the risk of disturbances in Sweden's power grid, the energy company Waterfall, producer of electrical energy, district heating supplier, and electricity network, which is owned by the Swedish state, commissioned ASEA, an electro-tech company, to create a computer-based monitoring system instead of communication being via telephone. The system that was developed covered the entire country and was called TIDAS, Totally Integrated Data System. ASEA was inspired by the packet forwarding in Arpanet, but TIDAS contained more computers, and the routing mechanism that Arpanet used had a too high of an error rate to be usable. In 1972, ASEA found a solution to the problem when they introduced a concept new for the time, called split horizon, and built a robust and stable routing mechanism. ASEA applied for a patent, but was not granted, and instead the results were published and the Arpanet was informed. The technology that was then free to use was eventually incorporated into the Arpanet and thus became part of the Internet. TIDAS was thought of as the world's first commercial Internet-like data communication system. It was put into operation in 1975, and today, the system is still based on the same principles and software as when it was started. During the 1970s, the Arpanet continued to grow and connect different research institutes and laboratories with each other, with support from the United States Department of Defense. Several of these laboratories were tasked with researching computing and computer networks, that began to develop the TCP/IP network, and its applications for the Internet. In 1980, the IP network became the official standard for the U.S. Department of Defense, which meant that Arpanet switched to that network on January 1, 1983, and thus became a central part of the first versions of today's Internet. When the National Science Foundation Network launched their new backbone in 1986, the downfall of Arpanet began, and by 1990, when everyone had switched to newer and faster Internet backbones, Arpanet was shut down for good. Stockholm has one of the fastest growing tech startup scenes in the world, and companies such as Skype, Spotify, Klarna, King, Mojang, iZettle, Trustly, Truecaller, and Yubico, have all developed from Stockholm's startup and scale-up scene. The ICT industry's contribution, as a share of Sweden's GDP, is among the highest in the world. In fact, only Ireland generates more added value in so-called computer services. More than 250,000 people work directly in ICT companies, many more if you add everyone in other sectors. In the capital Stockholm, 1 in 10 people work in the digital technology sector. As a result, leading technology companies have established their operations in Sweden to access the European market, establish their R&D or research centers of excellence, test new technologies, and acquire or collaborate with Swedish innovators. Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Fujitsu, Google, HCL, HP, IBM, Microsoft, Nvidia, Samsung and Tata are just a few global players that have invested heavily in Sweden. The Wallenberg family is Sweden's most powerful financial family. They alone control 40% of the Swedish stock market, worth over 1,800 billion Swedish kroners. Their net worth was estimated at 250 billion euros in 2015. The Wallenberg finance family's motto is said to be esse non videre, Latin for to be, rather to be seen. A motto that well exemplifies the enormous influence of the financial elite behind the scenes. Wallenbergs are noted as bankers, industrialists, politicians, bureaucrats, and diplomats. The Wallenberg sphere's holdings employ about 600,000 people and have sales of $154 billion a year. The Wallenberg family are Europe's most powerful business dynasty, and is also said to be one of the few families that rule the entire world. No wonder Sweden is involved in the digital evolution that is taking place on a global scale. To know where we're going, we have to know where things began, and what is taking place behind the scenes.